sought to have prominent voices, national voices, to speak on issues surrounding race and culture in these obviously quite polarised times. And we've heard from Mayor Anthony Williams, Governor Mark Morial, author David Brooks, and the Yale professor Stephen Carter. And tonight we are delighted to welcome our own city's Chief of Police, Chief Robert Contee. Chief Contee will be in conversation with parishioner and previous warden Rusty Linder, who I'm very grateful. Rusty has been absolutely instrumental in making this happen tonight. So Rusty, thank you so much. So Rusty will introduce Chief Contee in a bit more detail, but I just want to say how very grateful I am, Chief Contee, for your presence here this evening. You have a lifetime of service to this city, and have been intimately engaged with the challenges of every aspect of policing over these many years, including dealing with the unrest of 2 summers ago, which prompted this series of conversations on race and culture here at Christchurch. I'm also very glad to welcome, I understand, the commander of the 2nd Precinct, in which this church and community is set, Duncan Bedlion. Is he here yet? No, not yet.
Sooner.
And it's also a pleasure to welcome Pat Burke. Pat is a former Assistant Chief of Police and who currently serves as the Executive Director of the DC Police Foundation. Pat is a friend of Christchurch. Here he is, Pat. Thank you very much. And I know many of you in the room know Pat, and I was very grateful to him for taking me to visit police on duty in some difficult circumstances a couple of years ago. Thank you so much for doing that. And we're also honoured, she's not quite here yet, but she's definitely coming. We're also honoured and grateful that Bishop Marion Buddy, who is the Episcopal Bishop of Washington and our own diocesan bishop, of course, who will be with us shortly this evening as well. So, Chief, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for being with us. And as is our wont, if it's okay, I'm going to begin with a prayer. O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth. That in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Father Tim, and again, thank you all for coming, and Chief particularly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us this evening. I guess a couple ground rules. Mimsy, if I start mumbling, let me know, please. And secondly, the Chief has to be out of here about 7:45, so we'll kind of try to reverse engineer. We have thank you all. We had a lot of questions. We won't be able probably to get through all of them, but we'll try. And but as a fellow Washingtonian, as a fellow George Washington University Colonial, delighted to again be with you today, and thank you very much. Many of you probably read the biography that we circulated earlier about the Chief's path to this position, starting as a patrolman, sergeant, lieutenant, running, was in the homicide division, was in the sexual assault division, so it's hard to imagine anybody better prepared to serve in this position. I can assure you that his regards throughout the city is of the highest nature. You are the 5th of our speakers.
Thank you.
Following former Mayor Williams, who sends his very best regards, and would ask me to remind everybody in this room that as tough a position it is to be the mayor of a city, it's much tougher to be the chief of police. So, and he said that with the greatest sincerity. So some very difficult questions.
Okay.
All right. And first of all, again, welcome to our house of worship, Chief.
Thank you.
And we really do mean that sincerely, all of us. First question. So you grew up in the shadow of RFK Stadium. I presume you were a Redskins fan. Do the Commanders remain your favorite professional team in D.C.? Or
They're actually my second team. Yeah, so I definitely grew up in the shadows of RFK Stadium. In fact, when I was a kid, around the third quarter, after halftime, we would track kind of from our neighborhood, make our way to RFK, and the security there were kind enough to let a few neighborhood kids in because people would be leaving out because the Redskins, you know, every now and again they lose a few games. But they would let us in and we'd occupy some of those seats, man. So I got a chance as a kid early on to kind of see it firsthand. So, yeah, but I still root for the Commanders except for when they play the Eagles.
And that's because?
So, as a kid, again, growing up in the neighborhood, being in the shadow of RFK, it was my entire family's, like, everything was Redskins, right, or the Commanders now. But I had the little hat with the ball on it, the gloves with the fingers out, the socks, the pajamas, the bicycle, Joe Theismann, all of that stuff. And, you know, kids being kids, you get a little rebellious at some point. And I was like, man, you guys just overwhelm me. It's like I didn't have a choice, right? So I wanted to have my own choice, so that was kind of my choice, man.
Well, good choice this year.
Yeah, they're doing pretty good this year.
So, we all know to varying degrees, but it can all assume that, the exceptionally challenging job that you have. That executing your mission and ensuring public safety is perhaps as tough as it's ever been, maybe the toughest ever. It's almost unimaginable for many of us not in that profession. Have there been times when you've had to call upon your faith to get you through these challenging times that we've encountered?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is yes, every day. You know, from the first day on the job, from being 4 days on the job when we had the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, and I'm the chief of police. You're talking about calling on your faith. When you have the eyes of the entire world, not just Washington, D.C., but the eyes of the entire world on you, and you know at some point your every decision that you made will be second guessed. Every preparation step that you took will be examined, even by Congress and people far and near. So I find myself calling on my faith regularly in this space. When I go to the scene of homicides and I have to get up out of the bed and stand over someone's son or daughter that's been murdered, and I hear a mother wailing in the background because the only thing between that mother and her child are police officers. I call upon my faith in those times, on my way to the scene, and then on my way home, because when I get home, I can't talk to my family about what I just experienced, even though I'm directly impacted by it. So I find myself oftentimes, starting my day, every day as a matter of fact, having my own time with the Lord, having my own moments of reflection in the morning, and then on the back end of the day, as I kind of settle in and put my kids to bed and kiss my wife goodnight, again, just calling upon my faith, like strength to do this again the next day.
Yes. Next question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the shocking and these conversations are entitled Conversations about Race and Culture.
Sure.
And so this question is one of many that goes to that theme, and that is the shocking and nauseating murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, amplified by the ensuing outrage throughout the nation, have forced all good-hearted, conscientious souls to reassess their guiding principles, presumptions, and actions as they reflect upon the insidious consequences of endemic racism. So has MPD itself undergone such self-reflection, and as well as taken any remedial actions or new steps?
Yes, so I think it's important for all law enforcement agencies to really take a step back and reflect and adjust where you need to adjust. One of the first things that I did in the position as chief, and this was something that was supported by City Council, I wanted to have an outside entity In this case, it ended up being the Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, to come into MPD and really do a top-to-bottom assessment of the agency, looking in various areas. For example, one of the areas is, how do you eradicate, if you will, and I know that's a very strong word, but people who may be associated with hate groups, who could potentially be in your organization. How do you do that? When the line between First Amendment free speech and what people do, I mean, there's a very thin line between there. For some people, for example, if a police officer, I can think of one case where a police officer, let's say he lives in a house across the street and he has a stop to steal sign in his window. While we may not politically view things through the same lens, it doesn't necessarily make this person an extremist, that kind of thing. So I wanted an outside entity to really come in and look at our organization to really help us look across the country for best practices in this space. When we check with military and we check with FBI and check with all these folks, the reality was, like in this new space, people didn't have real answers. So I wanted to be one of the first in the country to really kind of be intentional in that space with our agency. And their assessment is just about wrapped up. They should be done probably within the next month or two. And that's something that I want to make very public, right? The results of the assessment that they did of our agency. And here are the recommendations. And these are the recommendations that we're going to adopt, or that we agree with or we don't agree with. In addition to that, because race is such an issue, across America, I mean, it's new for some and for others not so new, but because it is such an issue, I don't take for granted that every police officer who comes to the Metropolitan Police Department and desires to be a police officer necessarily see things through the same lens that I might see them or that you might see them. We all have our different perspectives. I have a saying, right? Different positions promote different perspectives. Different perspectives promotes diverse responses. And people who oftentimes are looking at the same thing through a different perspective, they see different things, they experience different things. So again, not taking that for granted at all. I wanted to make sure that we were very intentional again in this space. So one of the things that we started to do, and this is an idea that I pitched to Chief Newsham when he was sitting in this seat. Every police officer, since the challenges are really in black and brown communities, every police officer that comes to the Metropolitan Police Department, new recruit officer, professional staff members, we take them through an experience of the African American History Museum and Culture. It's taught by two professors, so there's an academic component to it, where they go through this experience at the museum. There's follow-up discussion like this in a group setting, and they are talking about like real issues. We don't take for granted that a kid who grew up, let's say, somewhere in Montana, he may have never had a negative experience with a police officer or negative experience with a black person, or maybe he has, but to kind of help these officers to understand, like when you go into community, why people sometimes are very frustrated with the police. This is kind of an opening, it's a conversation starter to really kind of get that going, right? Some of the police officers that we're hiring right now, 9/11 is like a thing that like, what is that? I mean, they know it happened, but we're hiring 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds. So again, when you're talking about things that happened in the 1950s and 60s and 40s, et cetera, that is a foreign concept to them. So one example, when you talk about, like when you go through the African American Museum of History and Culture, and I think about my own reflection, like on some things that I've heard from my father as I was growing up, you see young men who hang out on the corner, as an example, and some people immediately associate that with bad, while they're hanging out in the corner, or these guys are up to no good. And in some cases that is true, but let's look at really kind of the genesis of that and where it comes from. When you live in a place, for example, low-income housing, and it didn't have any air conditioning or anything like that, and in the summertime, the guys in the community, they stood on the corner and they sang doo-wop songs and snapped their fingers, and that's kind of the spot to hang out. And that has gone like generation after generation after generation. Now, there are people who have transitioned in that space where they're selling drugs or doing things that are legal in community, but to help people who might not be familiar with that to have some point of reference or context and why people do that is very important for us to start that conversation with them and give them a safe space to ask those questions and to challenge each other, quite frankly, in that space, because we have police officers who might be from New York or South Carolina, and we may have some police officers who are coming from out of the United States who are now U.S. citizens and joined our police department that really don't have a point of reference. So those are some of the things that we're doing in that space to really make sure that we have conscious police officers patrolling the streets of the District of Columbia.
So this would be both your cadets and also new hires from?
Everyone. Everyone, from top of the agency down to the bottom of the agency. Yes, everyone.
And what kind of feedback have you gotten?
So the feedback has been really, really great. Of course, we've had, some, and these are, and I really don't want to necessarily highlight the detractors, but some people feel like, well, we don't really have a problem, or I didn't really learn anything new that I didn't already know. But then some black and brown people, like, they learn stuff, right? For example, the professor, one of the questions they start out with, they asked them, like, how well do you know your city? How well do you know your history, et cetera? Wow, yeah, we do. And then they asked them, who is Howard University named after? It's a historically black college, or historically black university. It's named after a white guy. Anybody here knew that? Everybody know that?
Know it now.
It's named after a white guy, general from the military. Yeah. And the police officers who know their history, right? They're like, wow, wait a minute, maybe I can learn something here, right? Maybe there's a little something I can learn. I thought this HBCU thing really, but again, it's a conversation starter. And we take them to iconic places like Ben's Chili Bowl as an example and help them to understand a little bit more in terms of context about just kind of Washington, D.C., right? And here's a kicker, right? So some of you probably know Bernie Demchek, right? Some of you may. GW, right. Well, Bernie is one of the instructors for the course. Bernie's a white guy, right? But he's paired up with Dr. Sharita Jacobs, and they do a fantastic job of really communicating to our police officers, so much so that other entities from around the country, FBI included, other police departments, have reached out and they want to model their programs after what we're doing here in Washington, D.C. So we're very, very excited and very proud of that.
Skip this, but I won't.
Okay.
So, sadly, the racial tension, of course, has long existed in D.C. and elsewhere, and perhaps even more clearly in the wake of the last couple of years and the revelations for many that have resulted. So, then this is kind of, where do you see opportunities to build a compassionate sense of community? It goes beyond, outside the force, I would say, in the city, one founded on a better appreciation by all of the inequities and consequences of endemic racism and inculcate racism?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. And I really think that education is a key component that's missing. I think that we have ignorant people that are everywhere, of all races, all genders, but education, I think, is very important, and we have to be intentional in that space with our young people, from very early ages. I think that we see in community a lot of times when you talk about hate, that's learned behavior. My kid hang out at Palisades Park all the time, and he's a black kid, but he plays with white kids, he plays with Asian kids, and they're kids, and they just have a great time. But somewhere along the line, as they grow up, learned behavior kicks in, and there's a change, there's a shift, there's a difference that happens there. And I think that we just have to be very intentional in that space about how we talk to our young people about it. That's really where it starts. I mean, somebody who's had hate in their heart, for all of their life because of their father's experience or their mother's experience, or for some folk, I don't know, maybe it's their personal experience. But a lot of times I think that when you can educate a child and you can do it early on and then start to instill those values in them and just to value people, value human life. That's one of the things that we, in the crime space, that we struggle with right now. People have lost their sense of humanity just for other people, period. Just for other people, period. And that is a very scary thing. You know, as a law enforcement official, that's a very scary thing when you see it up close and personal, you know, the way that I do it. Sure, crime has been happening for years. You know, things happen. But the thing that's different now, you know, when you talk about like where we are, like where people are mentally, I certainly believe that there was some impact of the pandemic on how, you know, people just so tense and angry and all of this stuff. And you see it play out in how people treat other people, man. And that's the thing, that's one of the things really that is disturbing to me. But I think that, you know, with our young people, we have an opportunity with young people to be intentional in that space and to raise them up the right way, and to not be afraid to talk to them about the struggles of people who look different from how they look. You know, when I think about, and I know this is, you know, for example, I was talking to Pat about finding the right school for my son. Right, and my son has been in private school most of his life. I mean, he's only 9, right? So not a long time, but he's been in private school most of his life. But in that space of being in private school most of his life, 90% of the kids in the school don't look like him. The teachers don't look like him. He don't see, you know, like African American males who are in position of authority in the schools that he's attended. So, you know, this is a great school. But for this kid to go into this environment where it's kind of like foreign to him, it's easy for people to, I don't know, kind of be dismissive, that kind of thing. But, you know, to your point, just about on this whole issue, man, I really do think that the opportunity is with our young people and how we're raising them up.
And are you seeing instances where it's the young people who are educating their parents or the older folks?
Yes, you see a lot of that, right? I mean, you look at what we saw during and I don't want to put a label on it, but you know, when we saw the protests and the things that were happening in the community a few years ago, you know, seeing people who are of different races marching together in unity, you know, we saw that in the civil rights movement. But now here we are, you know, in 2021, 2022, where you're seeing some of that. You're seeing some of that again. It's a lot of young people. A lot of young people who are in that space, and they are having different experiences, man. And I think that can be a good thing, that people are educated, and certainly they're able to educate their parents. I learn from my children every day. You know, I learn something new from today. I learned about roadblocks or something like whatever. That's some kind of game thing. My 9-year-old is kind of hipping me to, but I'm like, okay, dude. And he's like, oh, Dad, yeah, this is so and so and so and so and so. So I'm always in the space, man, where I'm trying to learn, and I try to give my kids the space to just kind of do their thing and be, you know, kind of be free spirits in that space of experiencing other people who are different from them.
Well, thank you. The nickname that my kids have given me is Dumb Dumb Man, so I'm always open to learning more. They're a great model. So. Over your 33 years?
Yes.
33-year history with MPD, have there been episodes where you personally have experienced, subject to the vestiges of racism and inculcated?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. So, you know, I can't say that, you know, I don't have some horrible story that I can say, well, hey, you know, I was treated unfairly, or I was, you know, this, and it had something to do with my race. If it happened, it wasn't, I was not aware that it was happening. I'm sure, you know, currently in my role, I get a little bit more, you know, hate email and all that kind of stuff, you know, because of the seat that I sit in and some of the things that I publicly say. But coming up the ranks, you know, I'd be hard pressed to really think of a situation that you know, I can put my finger on. And it's not to say, and it's not to discount that other people have not had experiences, right? Because I think that there are people within our agency. I can think of a detective in particular who a few years ago had a bad experience with a fellow officer. This detective, he's a homicide detective, and this was very public. It was in the newspaper and so forth. He was dressed down, and another official from the Metropolitan Police Department, they kind of got into it. The detective ended up in handcuffs because this guy didn't realize that this was a police officer, the way he looked, and blah, blah, blah. I went to the academy with this guy, and that issue around that, it was about race. Again, not discounting what happened in this particular situation. It has not been my personal experience where, something has happened and I can point back to it and say, hey, look, this has something to do with hate, it has something to do with race. That hasn't been my experience.
As you moved up the ladder, though,
Mm-hmm.
did you occasionally take note of saying, this is something I may want to address at a later time when I have greater authority or greater latitude or whatever the case?
Absolutely. So, for example, historically, if you look at like the Metropolitan Police Department, I'm sure, Pat would probably agree with me. You go back 20, 30 years. Just for example, I look at the SWAT team, right? SWAT team. You think of SWAT team, what do you think of, right? The guys, they work out, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's the first problem. You just think of guys, right? That's an issue. The other issue that was part of of what I saw as an issue for the Metropolitan Police Department, most of the guys who were in SWAT, and this might, this might throw some folks off, but it was mostly black guys in the SWAT team. We had very few, if any, white guys that were part of the SWAT team, and things appeared to be, way unbalanced. But we had other units within the Metropolitan Police Department where it was exactly the other way. Like, maybe, I don't know, Harbor Patrol or something like that, where it's all white guys and then no black guys, like as pilots or anything like that. So as I look across the agency in spaces, especially as I've come up the ranks, I have been very intentional about helping to scaffold people, so to speak, who have an interest in this space. For example, one of the things that I did as I was moving up the ranks and became chief, we had the first African-American female head of the SWAT team here in the District of Columbia. And then recently, we brought in Pamela Smith, who's the former U.S. Park Police Chief of Police. We brought her in as our Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer for MPD. So really just that was intentional in terms of just taking a broader look at the agency across the board so that we can be intentional in specific spaces to say, hey, look, we want to be inclusive across the agency, not just all black or just all white or just all female or just all male. I take pride in the fact that MPD, when you talk in the space of gender, we have 23% of our workforce are made up of females. That's huge in law enforcement because in most police departments, the closest you're going to get is about 11, maybe 12%, right? So in this space, trying to be very inclusive in this space to make sure that we're not just, male-dominated force and all, these guys just think about working out and jumping out of planes and all this other kind of craziness. Like, we want our police department to reflect the communities that we serve. And in order to do that, you have to be very intentional in that space, and that's the route that we've taken.
So Chief, how has defunding the police, right, which by most definitions calls for the city revenues to be divested from police departments, department budgets, and reprogrammed into non-policing forms of public safety and community support, emphasizing social goals and crime deterrence. How has that affected the effectiveness of MPD in your estimation, pro and con?
Thank you, that's a good question. It sent a very bad message, I think, to most police officers. While it may have just been a slogan for some, to the people who are out here doing the work, it really cut to the core of what they do every day, right? And their desire to go out and do good in community. And when you talk about taking money away from that, for me, I reflect back to the 1990s when we really had money problems in this city. And all of the different challenges that we faced, and I thought about, you know, the lack of training and just the type of police department that we became as a result of not being invested in at that time. And that's a very real thing for a lot of police officers who don't want us to fall back on those type of times when we were not at our best, when we were not hiring the best applicants and so forth because the department was not invested in properly. So that certainly is a challenge, man. And I think that in this space, when you talk about pros and cons, I try to find the pros in anything. And even in this space here, I think what it has done, it has forced us to look through a different lens of how we might be able to do our jobs differently. And is there someone else who might be able to do the job that police officers do, to have police officers focus on other things? But even in that space, right, there are challenges. When we talk about, you know, mental health workers and all that kind of space, there's a shortage in that space. You can't, you know, it's not like just go out here and you have 50 mental health workers who volunteer to work midnights and late evening tours when these police officers out here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, they're a machine. They're always working, always working. You can always pick up the phone and get a police officer. So the pros are, it has forced us to look differently at what we're doing. Are there other ways to do things? Recently here, I was in Denver, and one of the things that they're doing in Denver that we certainly have the capacity to do here, the people who take accident reports, as an example, are not sworn police officers. They are civilian or professional staff members who, that's their job. They take accident reports. You don't need a gun and a badge to do that. So yes, it has forced us to think differently. But here's the downside. Here are the cons, right? The cons are the thing that caused me to pause, because it's like, we should be able to do both of these things, right? We should be able to invest in the police the way that we need to invest, but we also should be able to support our communities with whatever other services that need to be supported. Because at the end of the day, the mental health worker, when they get there on the scene, as an example, and the bad guy, like we had recently, he's taking off all his clothes and he's going bananas or whatever it is he's doing, what do you think they do? They step back and they say, hey, well, this is a police thing. This is not a us thing. And we get a lot of those calls when people are like that. So the police officers are still in that space, still operating in that space, even though we say, okay, we're going to take the money from them and we're going to put it over here. Well, we still got to have police officers to respond to that. The other thing that has really, in my opinion, through that effort, that has really a huge con for our city was when, as a result of this whole defund movement, when we stopped hiring police officers. It will be years before we recover from that. When I started as a chief of police on January 2nd, 2021, we had 3,800 officers. Here we are in October of 2022, we currently have 3,460 police officers. That is a staggering number. That number includes the 100 plus that are in the academy that are not on city streets. And, you know, I tell people all the time, hiring police officers is not like, you know, you hire a bartender. No offense to any bartenders in the room, but if you're, right, so a bartender comes in and he applies for a job, you say you have experience, blah, blah, okay, maybe you make this, okay, yeah, boom. All right, check a reference or two and you're hired, right? A police officer, once we go through a months-long process to get him in the door, then there's 8 or 9 months that he's in the academy, he or she is in the academy before we can put them on the street. So with 100 and some odd police officers, let's take that 3,460, and let's say we have 130 in the academy, subtract that 130 because they're not out here serving communities just yet, that really puts us down the neighborhood of 3,300 police officers, which is significantly low for this city. I mean, like scary low, because the president still moves and we got to deal with that. There's still all these street festivals that are happening, art all night, great streets that we do in the city. We got the African Summit that's coming up. We have all these. The Iranians are upset about what happened there, and they're showing up in Washington, D.C. by the hundreds and now growing to the thousands. We still have responsibility for dealing with all that while we deal with crime issues that happen in the community where people deserve to be safe. So in the con space, when you talk about the impact that it's had, that has been a significant impact on law enforcement agencies, not just here in Washington, D.C., but really across the country. But it has hit us very hard here in the city.
And you have a fairly high number of officers retiring, moving into retirement or close to retirement?
Yeah, so every year we have roughly about 300 police officers that retire, resign, or that retire or resign. And included in that are a small number of those may be terminations. But we are attriting higher than what we can hire right now, which is the problem. So let's say we'll probably, the fiscal year just ended, September 30th. So I think we're about maybe 360, so that's probably 60 over where we are normally. Again, if we could just put somebody in the seat and put them in the community and say, okay, you're on patrol, that's great. But even at number 60, that's about 3 police recruit classes to make up that number. We hire a class every month, but again, it's in a very challenging time where there's a shortage of police officers. We're in a very competitive market. Some people are just not interested in going to work, going into the office or having to go in to work in the car. People want to work from home, and people have choices now. Right. So we have been impacted by that as well, and that has made it very challenging. And it's a huge con for us. So
going to the issue of limited resources or reduced resources, coupled with a broad array of demands and constituencies.
Mm-hmm.
This question goes a little bit to this, and because you mentioned you're down to 3,400 and change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so 4 or 5 years ago, there were various council members who introduced legislation to increase the size of the police force to 4,200, which I think I recall was around 10% plus or minus. And most of the proponents, by recollection, I think this is correct, represented constituents who lived in high crime areas, including the 2 east of the Anacostia. They were voted down with laws, and on an 8-5 vote. To what extent does that kind of dynamic still manifest itself with respect to different parts of town have different ideas about what the appropriate kind of police and public safety coverage there should be, and whether it should be more, whether it should be less, and how do you juggle that, not to mention juggle your work with the council? Yeah, so that's very interesting, right? Because I've never been to a community where people say, hey, take my officers and send them over there. We don't, take that 20. We don't need that, right? That does not happen, right? So while we've had this period where people say, oh, less police this, less police that. When the shooting happens, when this happens, when that happens, right? The first question that they ask is, can we get some police officers here, right? Can we get police officers there? I was talking with a council member who operates in that space yesterday, and although the questions that I was being asked had nothing to do, the issues that were raised to me were prostitution, loitering, and vending. And while this council person acknowledged that these are not necessarily police issues, want to know what can we do about the issues, right? So I thought that was very interesting. I have another Conteeism, right? And that is that, people respond differently depending on their proximity to the pain. And I see a lot of that, right? I see a lot of that. People say, and again, my heart goes out to the unhoused community. I hate to see somebody living out in these conditions. It's been raining the last couple of days. But the other day, when I was driving down
Wisconsin Avenue, and there was a homeless guy posted up, sleeping inside of the Wells Fargo bank up on Wisconsin Avenue with all his stuff in there. I didn't want my wife to go into that bank, right? If that tent shows up in front of where my kid's school is or where I live, like, that feels different. And when the bullets start flying in the neighborhood where you live, that feels different, right? It's easy when it's over there, but when it's like right there, it feels different. And what I've noticed is that people sing different tunes when it's right there in front of where they live, right? When the speeding occurs in front of your kid's school or in front of where you live, it feels different than when it's over there, right? So let's say if you're in a different part of the city and traffic issues are not your issue, it's more violent crime, until one of the kids in your block get hit by a car that's speeding down the block. Now it feels different for you. So everybody in this space, on whatever side of the Anacostia River you are, it's relevant. It's relevant when that thing, whatever it is, when it comes down your block, it feels totally different, man. So I take a customized approach, if you will, with the various commanders. And that customized approach is you have to really know your communities, because different people need different things to make them feel safe. And if you are, a longtime resident in Georgetown, as an example, all right, there's certain issues and concerns that are specific to the Georgetown community that might not be the same issues over in DuPont Circle, or may not be the same issue in Shaw. But if you're trying to take the same approach for Georgetown, Shaw, and DuPont Circle, that could be an issue. I remember this. So when I was I think I was a commander over here then, we were having issues with robberies around P Street, where Rose Park is. People were robbing people right there, and they just go right back P Street, go the other way. So in my divine wisdom, I said, man, I'm gonna put up a big police light over here to light up this area because it's dark. The residents went crazy, right? They went crazy. Like, what is this? You're saying we have a crime issue? Like, it's not safe. I was like, I was really just trying to keep people safe because it's dark over here. But again, if I had moved that same light over to Shaw, it would have been welcome. Like, hey, look, yeah, this is exactly what we need. So you have to be customized and really know your communities and make sure that the things that we're doing to support our communities, that it really aligns with the values of the communities that we happen to be serving.
How are we on time? Are we? 15 minutes? You okay?
I'm good.
Great. Well, for now. So tell us a little bit about the cadet classes and how they, I know you take them very seriously and always have, but how they reflect DEI and other like issues of relevance.
So the cadet classes, that really is the secret sauce, man. It's the secret sauce to the future for us of having a diverse workforce here in the District of Columbia. When you talk about, we want to see homegrown police officers. Right now we're up to 96 police cadets. We're budgeted for 150, and that number is climbing. We pay them a salary of about $36,000 a year. So you can imagine a young person, 17, 18 years of age, they get a salary of $36,000 a year. We pay for their college, we pay for their books. We give them health insurance. Oh, absolutely. We give them health insurance. They are able to accumulate leave. And for some of them, quite frankly, it's a pathway out of poverty for a lot of these young people. And when I look at the makeup of the 96 police cadets, about 51% of them are women from challenged communities. 51%. So when you talk about, what our department will look like 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, these young people are the ones that will be making up the ranks of the Metropolitan Police Department that will help us get to my goal to get to 30% women by 2030. So this helps us in that space to really get to those numbers. And when you look at just within the ranks of the police cadet program, I am so proud of them, man, because these are young people who have made a decision early on, much like I did many years ago in 1989, but they made a decision. And in making this decision, they probably don't realize that it's probably one of the best decisions of their life. They probably don't realize that right now. I can reflect like now and be like, wow, I don't even know what I was thinking back then, but I wasn't thinking like how it might serve me later on in life by making this particular decision, because I got some friends who made other decisions and it didn't end so well for them. You know what I mean? So I am so very proud of our police cadets. We just got a lease on a new building for them because the program has been expanding so much so that we really busting at the seams, and we needed to put them in a new space. So we just went to, or DGS just signed a lease for a new building. We'll be moving into that new space, and I appreciate the work that community does around our police cadets. Also the DC Police Foundation, and then the pipeline to our cadets. Thank you, Rusty, because you guys invested in Youth Creating Change, which is huge, because that also is a pipeline to our police cadet program. When I get young people that are in there that are 17, 18 years of age, but they were, prior to that, they were part of Youth Creating Change, or they were part of our junior cadets, and they saw positive influences of police officers, and now they're coming through our doors to protect the nation's capital. That does my heart so good, man. That's one of the things, that's one of my whys. That's the reason why I put up with some of the stuff that I do, because those young people, they're worth it, man. They really are.
It's a privilege to be some of support.
Thank you.
And do those cadet classes kind of stay close to one another? I mean, do they say we're the class of 22 and where the hell is 21 and all that kind of stuff that some of us have?
Yeah, so it's a little different now. We used to bring them in as classes. Now they get hired, they may get hired in a group of 5, a group of 4, a group of 3, 2, 1, whatever. And as they get hired, depending on where they are in their college credits, some of them come with no credits, some of them come with some credits, and they, we want them to kind of just be, just like one group, so to speak, man. Yeah.
So I do know this, that across the nation,
Okay.
many consider MPD not only to be one of the nation's premier big city police departments,
Mm-hmm.
but one of its most progressive.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't always the case, and you've experienced it, I know,
Yep.
firsthand. So is that, well, I shouldn't say I know this. Is that an accurate or errant perception?
It's an accurate perception. I get called upon to go all across the country, literally, to talk about the Metropolitan Police Department, what we're doing here, and then other people are sending their folks here to the Metropolitan Police Department to kind of see what we're doing. And we're starting. Next year, I guess January, February, we're kicking off the DC Police Leadership Academy. It's been a thing that I've wanted to do. I think that you have to invest in leaders. As I say within the department, I believe in building a legion of leaders. So we're going to bring together it's kind of a 2-session program, but
it's a curriculum.
Yep, and this will be it'll be 60 folks that will be part of this first cohort. So 20 MPD, 20 from regional departments we'll do, and then 20 from across the country to include 5 international. Mid-level managers between the ranks of lieutenant and captain. These people will be the future chiefs and that kind of thing, but bringing them together here in Washington, D.C., investing in them, pouring into them, bringing some chiefs of police from around the country in to talk with these folks, Harvard case studies. In addition to that, African American Museum, Holocaust Museum experiences and so forth, but really investing in the future of policing in the profession. I've gone to other police departments again, just really focusing in on the executive leadership piece, because that's where the magic has to happen, man. If the executive does not believe in it, it's not going to happen. And I'm a firm believer in the Metropolitan Police Department setting trends for agencies all around the country.
Great source of pride. Many of us know about how much of your time is spent in the Wilson Building. And the challenges that often attend that. And so to what, there was some, a couple of years ago, an organization that came out that was called Stop DC Police Terror Project.
Yep.
That criticized the racist and militaristic DC police force. To what extent does that have an audience around the city, in the Wilson building, and how does that affect your efforts, your team's morale, and the like? Or are there constructive things that come out? I mean, I don't want to.
So there are kind of spin-offs of that about, and not with that particular group, but similar groups, you know, same ideologies, same beliefs, and so forth. When I got home from Dallas, pouring into police leaders 2 weeks ago, Friday, I came home, there were about 30 protesters in front of my home with signs, and you know, they're writing chalk all on the sidewalk, you know, like, your dad's a killer. My kids had to see this, right? Your dad's a killer. This is that, fire this officer, that officer, and so forth. And it was focused in on police officers who use deadly force in the line of duty. In both of these cases, the suspects were armed individuals. The one that most people might be familiar with, we had a police commander that shot and killed a guy down at the wharf a couple of months ago, and this guy was out there, you know, with the firearm. Well, apparently they don't like that, and I mean, it's unfortunate that people die in violent or in interactions where guns are involved. That is very unfortunate, but in terms of, you know, like this being your rallying cry to show up in front of my home where my children have to experience that, and my wife and, you know, other people who, you know, really have, and then, you know, some of my neighbors, God bless them, you know, really came to support and were like, hey, you know, like why are you guys, I mean, like, curse my neighbors out, man, and they were just, I mean, just all kinds of stuff. So I say in that space, Rusty, that I don't know that their message is necessarily getting across, except for to the people who believe in similar ideology, right? I don't think it's really, you know, taken a hold with a lot of folks. Some people have backed off, you know, as you talk about, you know, me kind of being around the Wilson building and so forth. Some people have kind of backed off of the hate the police rhetoric a bit, and, you know, now's not the time to do that. You know, it's not politically whatever, you know, especially when there are issues that are happening in community. Certainly if we warrant, you know, that level of scrutiny or whatever it is, then so be it. But, you know, I don't think that it gets that much traction outside of, you know, those groups of people who kind of operate in that space.
In our remaining time, if you don't mind.
No, sure, go right ahead, man. Far away, but.
First up.
Okay. First of all, I am a journalist, but this is totally off the record. I asked this as a parishioner and homeowner in DC, so it's full disclosure. But I just wondered if you could talk about trends you're seeing in crime here. Are we safe? Are we less safe than we used to be? And, you know, how careful should we be, you know, as especially if you're a woman walking down the street at night in Ward 2, Ward 3, I'm sure it depends on where you are.
Got it.
But just, you know, I moved here 11 years ago. It felt like it was safer then than it is now, but maybe that's just my perspective.
So perception is a big issue here, and right now what we are dealing with is the fear of crime and the perception. You'd be surprised to know that crime is actually, with the exception of the homicide category, which is up a few numbers, then we're up a few numbers compared to pre-pandemic, but the rest of the crime categories, we're actually below pre-pandemic numbers right now. We highlight it on Twitter, that gets retweeted. We got 300,000 Twitter followers, and we send it out, and then everybody else sends it out. And the other issue that we're dealing with right now is that now they're talking about crime, and this is different from back when you moved here 11 years ago. They're talking about crime every day on a national level, and they're talking about it on a regional level. So if they're not talking about Washington, D.C., they're talking about Prince George's County, they're talking about Montgomery County, talking about Fairfax County. When did they start talking about crime in Fairfax County? But they do now. So crime is always front and center. So we're really dealing with the issue of dealing with the fear of crime right now. I don't think that we're any, I mean, and again, just because, you know, I had the benefit of watching this stuff for 30 years, I don't think that we're any less safe as a city. We did experience in the month of January and February an uptick in carjackings, a stark uptick in carjackings. However, since June, when, I'll give you an example, right? So on May 1st, for the category of robbery, we were up 54%, May 1st. Here we are, October 4th, we're down a 9% increase in robbery. So it has been steadily going down, but every time there's a carjacking, every time there's a whatever, of course, that is front and center. So I try to be very careful in this space because you can't invalidate the way that people feel, how they feel when they walk their dog, or how they feel when they're out in communities. So to say that the numbers are going this way, but people feel like crime is this way, I think we have to find the balance. Give people really like the facts, here's where we are, but also, you know, not invalidating the way that people feel.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll let you choose.
This gentleman here, and it was.
Yes. I want to know what the schools are doing to help or not, and particularly the charter schools, of which I had a role in starting. Have they been helpful?
When you say helpful, I think that there are more things that can be done in that space. I'm a firm believer when we talk about crime and some of the issues that we see with our young people, we have to start teaching them how to resolve conflict at an earlier age than where we are right now. And that's one of the key things that I see that's missing. When you have a young person who believes that the only way to resolve a conflict is through the use of a firearm, that tells me that this young person has not been skilled along the way to resolve conflict. And unfortunately, we see shootings in that space. We see, you know, other crimes that happen, you know, in that space when young people haven't been taught early on. So the charter schools specifically, they're all like independent contractors, right? Every charter school is kind of different, and there's a challenge in that space with them. Yes, we can communicate to the charter school board for all the executive board for all the charter schools, but you know, each charter school kind of do their own thing. Some of them are welcoming of the police, if you will, and then others are, no, we really don't kind of need that at our charter schools. But if there is help if we are to be helped, and I think community as a whole, I think, in the space of conflict resolution, that's the space where we could use a lot more help from the charter and public schools. This young lady here, and then I'll go over here to here, and then over here. Yes.
So culture within MPD, misogyny is a massive problem. Now, the number one crime that women actually experience isn't the scary person in the street, down the dark alley, it's domestic violence, it's intimate partner violence, it's gender violence. That the most dangerous place for a woman is her home, in fact, not dark alley. That's the myth. So MPD, because of the seriously misogynistic culture that pervades MPD, it means that when MPD officers rock up on the scene, when they're called by the victim, they do an abysmal job, absolutely abysmal. Not only do they not assist the victim, they often assist the batterer. And that is why the number one cause for homelessness for women in this city is domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and gender violence. And it has been exacerbated by the response of the police when they are called by the victim. So, the question is, what are you doing to fix this pervasive, rotten culture of misogyny in the city? And by the way, as background, I have spent hundreds of hours with homeless women, hearing the appalling stories of what the cops did, how they responded, what your cops responded when they were called for assistance from these women, who are now in the shelters, who are now on those street corners. When are you going to start taking this seriously? And by the way, it's women of colour that are suffering the worst of this because they are experiencing deep-rooted misogyny in your culture as well as the racism. So it's the worst of worst. When are you going to start taking this seriously?
Let me answer the question.
When are you going to take this misogynist
So,
misogynistic culture seriously?
so I've been taking it serious my whole career, and I'm sure that just as much as we have some people who have had that negative experience, we've also had people that have had different experiences based upon our work in the advocacy space with the many advocacy groups like OCAP and so forth that we work with, who come out and ride with our police officers when they're responding to domestic situations, because we understand that the person that they might want to talk to might not be the uniformed person. It might be that OCAP representative. And we were doing this and we've started back, but we were doing this all the way up to COVID, where we actually had advocates riding with our police officers. We have a system in place now where our police officers on their departmental phone can put victims in contact with advocates on the scene. And we've worked hand in hand with Kylie Hogan and the rest of the folks to make sure that MPD is not this agency that you've described. Again, while there may be some instances where that has happened, I don't think that that is the overwhelming experience of every woman that we encounter. We're locking people up for domestic violence every day in the city. It's unfortunate that there have been situations like that where people have had to experience that. That breaks my heart to hear that. But as long as I'm in this seat, what I'm committed to doing is making sure that our officers are properly trained, making sure that our officers are equipped with what it is they need to resolve those issues, that they have the training from the advocates. We've invited them into our space. We've given our curriculum to them. We've given in addition to our curriculum, we actually have them to come in and actually do the training with our officers so that they are informed through the lens of the victim. And I think that that is very important. So again, just kind of getting to your issue, I mean, that breaks my heart to hear that, ma'am, but I don't, through my lens, that is not the overwhelming response of all the police officers in the Metropolitan Police Department as we deal with victims. We take that very seriously. So this lady here, and then I'll come to Mr. Evans right here. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to piggyback on what you said as far as like the youth not being able or not knowing how to resolve conflict.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think it's really that. So I don't even know if I don't think this is a question, but just a perspective for you, not only you, but everybody in here, from me being a Washingtonian and growing up in Southeast DC. I think what it is just like miscommunication with the police department and the citizens in the city, with me being a citizen in the city, as far as not being safe. Not just for people who live in Georgetown or Chevy Chase or anything like that, because I feel like, not saying that y'all feel protected, because I don't know how y'all feel, I don't live in those areas, but like in our areas, we don't feel protected. So if we have to have a gun, and I'm saying this just because, what was that, Saturday? Somebody was just trying to break into my house, and it took 20 minutes for the police to even show up. And then when they showed up, they told me that they couldn't even do a police report because they didn't see no signs of a break-in, even with the glass door being broken to the main door in my apartment building.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just something, not saying, I don't know what the academy trains these police officers on, but not just that, because you also, I know you said before that it's not as easy as a bartender, but I feel like you could actually compare the two, because the same way you could hire a bartender, you could hire a police officer. We don't know what these people are thinking. We are humans. Like you said, we are losing empathy and humanity for citizens. We've lost that companionship for everybody, not just racial, it's stereotypes. Because you could look at me and be thinking like, okay, well, we don't know what she's about. We don't know what she's going to do. You can get scared at me walking down the street, or how I talk, how I express myself. You can be scared. But I feel like the police department needs to find some type of way to interact with the city, the urban city at that, more, so that way we can both feel safe. Because I know they feel unsafe on both parts. Not just us, but just y'all too. Because if you're saying that you're shooting first because somebody is armed, that doesn't necessarily mean they want to shoot, so you're going to shoot first. I don't know what y'all training is about, but we need to find a resolution on how we can both see each other. Because I think, honestly, from what you said, because I was a little leery about you at first, I think it's just really a misunderstanding on both parts. But we need to find some type of way that we can correlate some type of way, so that way we don't have this misunderstanding between the two. Because then I think that's the whole problem, the misunderstanding.
So I appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much for that. And, just like you, born and raised here too. Northeast, Southeast, Carver Terrace, all that. I get it. When I talk to the young men in communities, and these young men who, for example, are dropping, it just happened recently, young man dropped a diss video on YouTube dissing some other community about whatever, or some other dude. Within about 3 days, he's dead, right? That's conflict. That's unresolved conflict. And we don't talk enough about that when we have disagreements about how can we respectfully disagree without somebody having to die as a result of that. That is a problem. It is a problem that has been in our community for years. When I grew up on 21st Street, I didn't know why we didn't like the dudes in Langston. I don't know why we didn't like the dudes in Trinidad. We just knew we just didn't like each other because this is where we live. And that was just like dumb, right? I convened a group of about 100 young people, got them all in the auditorium over at Eastern High School, had the same conversation with them. And when we start talking about this issue, that's one of the issues that they raise, like this stuff like we learn from like our mother and our uncle and our father, like we just don't like that neighborhood over there. We don't know why Simp and 37 don't get along. We just know we just don't like them. That's unresolved conflict, and that is a real issue in our communities, and oftentimes we don't talk about that. People die, people get shot, people whatever, and that's kind of dismissed, and it happens in our city.
Talk about that. I think we do, but besides that, I get what you're saying for that. But besides that, what can we do for the police department?
What are you guys doing, or how can we help to rebuild the communication and the community, to rebuild the relationship between the officers
Yes.
and the community? Because I understand you're saying the youth is growing up and they're learning this, but at the same time, you guys, that's their community. You guys have your own community. Your community don't like us, their community don't like y'all. That's how it is. So it's the same, it's like that's the neighborhood, y'all neighborhood. So how can we rebuild the relationship in these different neighborhoods? Because, for example, I helped lead a protest with all teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
All teenagers in Northwest DC, all teenagers, peaceful, and not one police officer said, "I'm sorry for your loss," regardless of what happened or what the issue is. We understand all of that, but not one police officer looked at those kids like a person, like a human.
Mm-hmm.
That is a problem. And in that community, I would appreciate these type of conversations to go on in that community, because my goal in life is to help my community. And the only way we can help it is to work with different communities. So for instance, the police officers, y'all are your own community. So how can we rebuild the relationship between this community, your community, my community? How do we rebuild those relationships?
So it's a couple of things. One, we have to stop looking at each other as separate communities. We're all a community. We all live here, work here, whatever it is we do, but we're all one community. And as we talk about how you build relationships, one of the first things that we did, and this is, again, it's having an intentional conversation. I was very intentional in this space, even during the pandemic when people didn't want to come together. We brought in Dr. Muhammad. I don't know if you guys know Dr. Muhammad from Howard University, but she's very, very talented and very intentional in this space, especially with issues like this. And she brought a cross-section of people together, even in the virtual space, on 6 or 7 different occasions, to really just get the conversations started so that people who live in different communities could have conversation with people, and the police were also part of this, but can talk with each other. And then we were able to break it down even further, where we went into different sessions with people who live like in, let's say like if it's all Carver Terrace people, we were all in a session together because our experience might be different from the people who live in Chevy Chase. So we wanted to address just that experience there. And Dr. Muhammad has students to facilitate these discussions in these various different groups. Very informative. It was everybody working together, police officers saying their experience, what that experience is. Police officers who grew up in this city, that's part of our department, who live in various communities, them having their perspective, as well as people who are residents. So it's everybody, I think, being intentional in this space to make sure that we are one city, not a divided city. It's us, it's them, it's, you know, the reality is we all need each other. If we're gonna be successful as a city, it starts with everybody coming together. So the things that I've tried to do is really kind of work in that space. All the things that we talk about, the different programs that didn't exist before, all of those are intentional efforts to bring folks together, you know, to bring the young people together. When I brought those 100 young people together, it was a very intentional reason to do that, to hear from them, not from the adults, right? Because their view, their thoughts and their perspective is different from the adults a lot of time. But I wanted to hear from these young people. And as I I remember this one particular young man talking about when a police officer had approached him on it was two police officers, approached him and a guy, and they were on the basketball court. And he said, "Chief, the first thing I started to do, I started to run." He said, then the police officer said, "Hey, like, what y'all doing?" And his response is like, well, why is he asking me what I'm doing? He said, but the police officer just wanted to shoot ball with him. He just wanted to shoot ball with him. And so when I had to unpack that with them a little bit. And I said, well, what do you want? What do you want? In a space right now where we're saying no police this, no police in school, no police. So everything that we tend to be doing is trying to cause a greater divide. When I talk to these young people, they say we need to have more positive interactions, space for positive interactions with our young people. And that's what I'm focused on, making sure that we have more positive interactions. The experience that you had where somebody, and this is this is just, I'm reflecting back on something that you mentioned, but where you talked about the police officer who came and, you know, he didn't do a report or whatever for a broken window. That's a lazy police officer. That's what that sounds like to me, and that should be addressed, right? That's what that is. I mean, in any profession, we got over 3,000 employees. You're gonna have some. Just like I can think of a lot of police officers who would get the shirt off their back. For most people in their career, I know a lot of police officers like that. Some of them are homegrown in this city. One in particular that I'm thinking of, I'll share this quick story with you and we'll go to Jack. So this happened on Minnesota Avenue. We had a young kid, he got robbed. He was on his way to get the new PlayStation. His mother had given him some money to get his new PlayStation. And a police officer responded, kid got beat up and they took his money. Police officer responded, and I'm gonna use this race because it kind of matters in this case. But it was a white police officer, black kid. Police officer responded, took the report, kid goes home. This police officer goes back to the station and he's talking about this situation that he had where this kid got robbed and they took his money for his PlayStation. Well, some of the colleagues took that story and they went to a third-party support or a non-government support folks and said, hey, look, we got this kid over here. Long story short, this third-party group said, well, we'll replace this kid's, we'll give him the money, or we'll give him a PlayStation to kind of help him out. Sorry this thing happened. They took that PlayStation to his door, knocked on his door. His mother answered the door, and she was like, I really appreciate this, but that police officer, the white police officer who took the report, he bought him a PlayStation a couple of days ago and bought it past and dropped it off here. He wasn't asking for any fanfare. He not from that neighborhood. He don't know that kid from a can of paint, but he had enough compassion in his heart to just go out and do something nice with somebody. And those things happen like all the time. Sure, we got the bad stuff that happens. That's anywhere. You got bad doctors, bad lawyers, but police officers are in our communities like day in and day out. And we have to make sure that we're very intentional in making sure that we get the best possible product, which is why when people talk about what are we doing for young people, what are we doing? Well, I'm employing them. That's what I'm doing. I've expanded the cadet program to employ young people while they're still in high school. I'm paying them a wage of $17 an hour while they're still in high school. And when they graduate, it's not a guess about what they're going to do. They go from $17 an hour at the age of 17 upon graduation into a job that pays them $36,000 a year. I'm educating them. I'm putting them through college. I'm paying for their books, doing all of that. Why? Because it's important to me, because I understand, being a kid who sat in that seat, that is a pathway out of poverty for young people. It really is. When you're coming from, for some people, right? Let me make it plain for you. So for me, right, growing up in a house with a father who's addicted to drugs ever since he was 17 years of age. Both my mother and father, both of them suffer from cerebral palsy. But growing up in that household, in a dysfunctional household, how was I going to get up out of Carver Terrace? It became a pathway out of poverty for me. Yeah, I could have gone to the military, but the options when you live in the hood, right, for me, right, I don't know what part you, but I'm just saying from where I was, the options were real limited for me. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it became a pathway out of poverty to do something different. So when I talk to these young people, I see that in a lot of them. A lot young people who dealing with homelessness, who sleeping in cars and so forth. And for them, right, it's not just about getting a job. It's like, this is an opportunity for me to do something different and serve my community in the process. While we talk about police officers not good in community, well, what happened if I was one of those police officers in the community? Maybe I'd do it differently, and maybe people might learn from me how to do this thing better. So that's the way, that's the lens that the same situation where I'm trying to impact young people from multiple different areas, not just conversation, but also, again, through action, through employment, and doing other things to really try to move them forward. But I appreciate you. Those are great questions. Thank you so much. Jack.
Jack, this has got to be short. Hey, Jack.
You all for those questions. They were terrific and shed some light on the discussion that we may not have had otherwise. So thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.
Couple agrees. Jack,
Yeah, I'll just
you're the last one.
I'm going to make it quick.
All right.
Chief and I worked together for 30 years.
Yep.
When he started, I started on the council, and we just grew up together.
Yep.
It took a city from, as you know, in the mid-90s, the murder capital of the country,
Yep.
the unsafest cities in America,
Yep.
to the complete opposite, one of the safest cities in America. So these are the two questions real quick. He said the one thing that I just have to say. In my 30 years on the council, I probably went to 200 meetings a year. That's 6,000 meetings across the city. Never one meeting, right? Did anyone ever stand up and say, we got too many police? Never. What was the one thing they always said?
We need
never
more.
see the police.
Never see them, yep.
Never see the police. So this is my first question. To your point. Back in the 90s, it was the same problem. I don't know what the number said. People don't feel safe. I can stop every day when I'm running. People complain to me, I don't feel safe. I feel like crime is out of control. Whether it is or not, people feel that way.
Yes.
One of the ways we addressed it in the past was to have a police presence. You're down to 3,400 officers. My 30 years on the council, we never had that few officers.
Yep.
It's the lowest we've been in the
30
time that I
years.
can remember.
Yep.
And that's because of the council. The mayor tried to increase it, council cut it in half, and now you're down, which is going to be very hard to rebuild, because that was my bill, it was 4,200 officers.
Mm-hmm.
We should have set a floor of 4,200, mandated it, but it didn't happen. So number one, Chief, what is the approach, and I have a second part, what is the approach to make people feel safer? We put officers out on patrol. That's where cop came from, constable on
Patrol, all right.
Put them out, walk them around. Remember Chief Ramsey put the lights on the cars.
Yep.
So you'd see the cars drive, you'd feel safer. Number two, homicides are 150-something, they're gonna go over 200. Remember, we took it from 500 to 80.
Yep.
It was you at the head of homicide.
Yep.
All right, we're gonna go over 200. How do we get the guns? We were doing the stop and frisk back in those days. It didn't work out for lots of reasons. How do we get the guns? So that's a two-part question.
Thank you, Jack, for that. So,
And I just want to say one final thing. We are extremely lucky to have him as our police chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So regarding making people feel safe, right? It's like, I mean, if you think of any business model, I'm sure you got a lot of business folks in the room, right? If you have less resources, how do you produce the same product with less resources? We've had to transition to, essentially what's called hotspot policing, and it's kind of what police agencies across the country, Dallas being one, Dr. Lum out of George Mason University is really one of the industry leaders in this space that suggests that when you have police officers in an area, not necessarily sitting on a corner, let's say, but you put them in an area, they are in that area for X amount of time, they are able to get out, walk the beat for a little bit, back in the vehicle, back on the calls for service, et cetera. You get more bang for your buck, so to speak, in that space, as opposed to, like, now, we can't put a police officer on every corner, and it's things that are happening all over the place, and you have a thing there, and you got to move the resource from over here. So we are heading in the direction of hotspot policing, coupled with focused deterrence, which means that you focus on the most violent people in community. To bring down the level of violence. For example, if you look at our homicide suspects on average have been arrested 11 times on average prior to them committing a homicide, right? And that's a very unsettling thing, because certainly you will have to ask yourself, well, how is it that a person who's been arrested for robbery, for this, for that, for this, for that, make it to 11 times and now they've committed a murder in community? That goes beyond the police department, right? But we have to think about doing business differently. We have to challenge some things that in the past, I think, people were okay with. I don't know about you, but I feel some kind of way that a person commits a homicide, a person who commits a shooting, a person who commits an armed robbery, that person, prior to their trial, that they're allowed back in community with an ankle bracelet on. I think that is devastating. Communities all across the country, and it bothers me that when you can look right across the bridge at Virginia, for example, where they don't play that. And I mean, even when I was a kid, right? I mean, we kind of knew, like, all right, if you go, like, you better make your way back to DC. Don't get caught in Virginia, because that could be a problem for you, right? That's not the case. That's not where we are right now. And unfortunately, we have too many people who are walking around pending trial for their gun case, pending trial for their carjacking, that are still out in our communities, and that makes our communities feel less safe. So we got to focus on those guys. And to your second point about the firearms, we got to focus on illegal firearms. The difference between then and now, our firearms are awash in more firearms than I've ever seen in my entire life. And I've been with this department for over 30 years now. I've never seen so many firearms in the streets of the District of Columbia. Not only are we finding them on our homicide suspects, but we're also finding them on our homicide victims in a lot of cases. And some people may argue, oh, people carry guns for safety, this and that. Well, the reality is, if a person has a gun on them and they find themselves in a situation, they're going to use it, right? And as my mother would say, bullets don't have nobody's names on them, so you don't have control over where that shot goes once you start firing these rounds. The other very important thing is we have to leverage, and we are doing this in DC, you have to leverage the partnerships that we have with our federal partners, FBI, ATF, DEA, et cetera, because in some cases, and this is what we've been working on for the last, I would say, maybe close to a year now, is working on leveraging some, like in some cases, like federal charges on individuals, because when they go through the federal system, the accountability level is much, much greater than what it is. One of the cases, man, that really just kind of really broke my heart. I was at a church retreat in last July, and 6-year-old Naya Courtney up on Mark, they called me and said, hey, we got the 6-year-old just got shot. Naya Courtney she was a victim of a drive-by. They were shooting at her father and some other people that was out there. This 6-year-old girl took a bullet and she died as a result of that. We had federal warrants, and the takedown was that happened on a Friday. The takedown was happening on Wednesday, the following week. And all of those guys who were part of that conspiracy over there, when we did do the takedown, might say a day late, dollar short, but when we did do the takedown, all those individuals are still held in federal prison right now, pending their court trial. So I think we have to be more focused in that space to look at, and this is something that I've launched. I mean, some of the cases that have come up, but we're doing several other ones in communities across our city, where the federal task forces that I've developed are focusing on just that, the bad actors. I'm not talking about the guy who's smoking the weed because he got that's just what he does. I'm talking about people who make our communities less safe and really focusing in on them. So kind of 2 parts, Jack, really getting those guns out of the street, holding the violent criminals accountable for their actions, man, are really, really, really important, coupled with what we do on the patrol side to really reduce the fear of crime that people have.
Thank you, Chief.
Pleasure. Absolutely.
Thanks for staying.